Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, we're stepping into the silken nightmare of Imperial China, where the walls are high, the etiquette is strict, and your worth is measured in how still you can sit while looking decorative. This isn't a tale of romance in silk robes or poetic moonlit trysts. No, tonight you're a concubine, a disposable ornament in the Emperor's human collection. Before you start romanticizing this as some lavish period drama, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this content. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's tuning in from around the world. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and prepare to spend the rest of your life as a delicate pawn in a velvet prison. You are not a princess. You are not a wife, you are something in between, something decorative, vaguely prestigious, and wholly disposable. You've been chosen. That's the word they use, chosen. As if this is some divine honour bestowed upon you for your virtues and inner strength, instead of a cold transaction involving bribes, rankings, and your father quietly pretending this is the best thing that could have ever happened to you. You're young, barely old enough to braid your own hair, and now you are the newest addition to the Emperor's vast, shimmering collection of women. Congratulations, you're now property, specifically Imperial property, and the return policy does not exist. Maybe your family pulled strings to get you here. That's a good sign, in the same way that selling the family dog for parts is a good financial move. Or maybe you were one of the girls gifted to the palace from a loyal province, offered up like tribute, wrapped in silk and silence, a token of respect, a bargaining chip, an ornament that walks. You said goodbye to your home under the watchful eyes of your village, who all looked at you with a mix of envy and pity. After all, being a concubine means you'll never go hungry, but also you'll never go home. The journey to the capital was long, silent, and supervised. You were not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You were not allowed to look anyone in the eye, and when you crossed the threshold of the Forbidden City, the gates shut behind you with a weight that didn't feel symbolic. It felt permanent. You've entered a world of painted walls, echoing corridors, and rules so intricate they require their own bureaucracy. Your name was logged, your background verified, your clothes replaced, your reflection, if you were even allowed a mirror, already starting to disappear. You now belong to the inner court, a section of the palace cut off from the rest of the world by architecture, protocol, and sheer imperial indifference. It's a place both grand and claustrophobic, courtyards full of carved jade and cherry blossoms that never bloom for long. The air is thick with incense and fear. Everything smells faintly of sandalwood, dust, and suppressed ambition. You'll live here among hundreds of other women, all technically sisters, all silently rooting for each other's downfall. There is no solidarity, there is no escape, there is only the hierarchy, and you are at the very bottom of it. Your title, for now, is as generic as your new role. You are a concubine in training, which means you spend most of your time being taught how not to offend people, more important than you. This includes everyone. You learn the proper way to bow, not too low, not too stiff. You learn how to speak, softly, slowly, and only when addressed. You learn how to walk, gracefully, with tiny steps that suggest refinement, but definitely not urgency. And you learn very quickly that opinions are not part of your new identity. You may be beautiful, you may even be clever, but cleverness is dangerous here. Beauty fades. Obedience, however, is forever. You sleep in a shared room for now, with a few dozen other new arrivals. The beds are hard, the blankets thin, and the silence absolute. Even at night, no one dares to whisper. There are ears everywhere. The walls have eyes. The eunuchs pass silently through the halls, watching, recording, remembering. They're the enforcers of the rules, and their loyalty lies with whoever currently holds favour. You try not to draw attention. You try not to cry, you're here now, and there's no going back. Every morning begins before sunrise, not because you're busy, but because showing discipline is more important than actually doing anything. You're bathed, dressed, and arranged like a human flower arrangement. Your hair is combed into an acceptable shape. Your hands are inspected for roughness. If they find a callus, you'll be reminded that a concubine's worth is in her softness, not her productivity. You are meant to be pleasing. Always pleasing, never loud, never tired, never real. Meals are served in eerie silence. The food is good, at least it's better than what most of the Empire eats, but it doesn't taste like anything anymore. You chew mechanically. You do not speak. You do not look up. You are being watched for posture, manners, and the subtle signs of defiance, which in this world could include something as simple as sighing too audibly. You've already been warned twice about your tone when thanking the kitchen staff. Next time, you might not eat at all. You're told this is a sacred duty, that to serve the Emperor is the highest calling a woman can hope for. You smile, nod, and pretend to agree. But you know what this really is. You are here to be beautiful, to be still, to be quiet until called for, and then even quieter. Your worth is now determined by how well you fit into the aesthetic preferences of a man you've never met. A man who may never even glance in your direction. And yet, every hour of your day is shaped around that possibility. The senior concubines don't speak to you. They glide past you like lacquered ghosts, their expressions unreadable, their makeup flawless. They were once you. Now they are something else entirely. Power in silk robes, wearing perfume and subtle menace. If you're lucky, they ignore you. If you're not, they notice you. And that, as you'll soon learn, is rarely a good thing. One wrong glance, one misplaced compliment from a eunuch, and you could find yourself mysteriously reassigned to the laundry quarters for a month of reflection and silence. You wonder sometimes if anyone ever leaves. No one talks about it. But the answer is no, not really. The gates you walked through are still there, but no one you know has walked back out. Some concubines become nuns, some are quietly retired, some simply vanish. You try not to think about it too much. You are here now, and that is all that matters. At night, you lie still in your narrow bed, staring up at the polished wood ceiling. You can't see the stars from here. You can't hear the wind. All you hear is the quiet shuffle of soft shoes on polished stone, the occasional cough, the distant echo of palace life continuing just out of reach. You close your eyes and try to imagine what freedom felt like. A breeze on your face, a loud laugh, the feeling of being wanted, not selected. That's over now. You are no longer a person in the way the outside world understands it. You are part of the harem, a whisper in the Emperor's shadow, a name on a list, a potential name in a lineage you'll likely never see. You belong to the palace now, to its rituals, to its silence, and most of all, to its rules. Sleep well. You'll need the energy. The rest of your life is just beginning. It started with an inspection. Not a warm welcome or a ceremonial entrance, but an inspection. You were told to stand straight, keep your eyes down, and remain perfectly still. Then came the eyes, dozens of them, all watching, all judging. A panel of senior consorts, mid-ranking wives, and high-ranking eunuchs sat fanned out in a crescent of embroidered authority, their expressions as unreadable as the palace rules they enforce. You were not introduced. No one asked your name. They already knew it. It was printed on the little scroll beside your feet, next to your province, your age, and a brief note about your family's social usefulness. The room was bright and echoing, with polished floors that made your footsteps sound embarrassingly loud. You tried to glide the way you'd been taught, quietly, like a falling petal, but you're fairly certain you came off more like a startled goat in slippers. Still, you made it to the centre of the chamber without tripping, which probably put you ahead of at least a few other girls. That thought was immediately followed by guilt, then anxiety, then the ever-present weight of nausea that came from having your entire future decided by people who haven't said a single word to you. The lead eunuch stepped forward and began the examination. He didn't touch you, that would have been improper, but he gestured. You turned, you bowed, you lifted your sleeves. You opened your mouth. Your teeth were inspected from a safe distance, as though you might bite. You stood perfectly still, as your skin tone, posture, and general feminine bearing were discussed in hushed tones by women wearing more jade than you'll probably ever own. You were judged not just by what you were, but by what you might become. Would you age well? Could you bear healthy children? Were your hips wide enough? Was your voice soothing enough? Did your silence suggest serenity or simply a lack of wit? You were not the only one being examined that day. You and 24 other girls were presented in sequence, all of you somewhere between 12 and 16, all of you wearing the same nervous expression, disguised behind layers of ceremonial powder. Every face bore the same haunted glaze, a kind of frozen half-smile worn by people trying to look graceful while being mentally graded like livestock. No one cried. That was considered disrespectful. Instead, you waited your turn, and when it came, you smiled, not too broadly, not too coldly, and you stood in front of the tribunal while they decided if you were worthy of a life that most women would flee from if given the chance. The chart was real. You weren't supposed to see it, but you did. A glance over the eunuch's shoulder as he marked something next to your name. There were categories: physical appearance, composure, bloodline, education, obedience potential. That last one had 3 subcategories, which you didn't have time to read. But you understood what they meant. You were being evaluated for your ability to follow orders, say thank you, and never, under any circumstances, speak unless someone richer than you made it explicitly clear that your voice was required. It rarely would be. There was no applause, no ceremony, just a nod. A simple, measured nod from one of the senior concubines that told the others, this one will do. And just like that, your fate was sealed. You are now officially on the path to becoming one of the Emperor's concubines. You would be entered into the rolls, given a room in the lesser quarters, and subjected to the slow, methodical erosion of identity known as training. Somewhere, someone wrote your name in ink on a scroll. Somewhere else, your mother lit incense and prayed for your advancement. You, however, just stood there, still smiling, still silent, still wondering if this was what success was supposed to feel like. Not everyone was so lucky. A few girls were dismissed before the end of the day. One had a stammer, another had a limp. One cried too much and was labelled temperamentally unstable, which in palace language meant she was unlikely to make it through a week without unravelling or offending someone important. They were sent back, their families notified, their futures rerouted into far less prestigious forms of confinement. Maybe a low-ranking marriage, or a life in a temple, or if the family had truly overreached, a quiet disappearance. They would not be remembered. You might have envied them in a distant, traitorous way. At least they got out. At least they were spared the velvet grindstone you are now stepping onto. Because from this moment on, your life would not belong to you. It would belong to routines, to rankings, to whispers in hallways, and passing glances in silk-draped corridors. You would be reshaped, repackaged, and presented again and again until someone with power decided what to do with you. Back in your room that night, you shared a celebratory bowl of sweet rice with the other selected girls. No one spoke. Not because you weren't allowed, but because no one really had anything to say. What was there to celebrate exactly? That you were attractive enough to be accepted, but not so striking that you became an immediate threat. That you managed to appear submissive without seeming dull. That you would now spend the rest of your life in competition with other girls who smiled just like you and dreamed the same dreams of safety, disguised as status. As you sat in silence, a tiny part of you wondered what the Emperor was doing at that very moment. Was he even aware that a new batch of girls had been processed? Did he care? Would he ever meet you? Would he remember your face, and would it matter if he didn't? You fell asleep that night knowing the answer to all of those questions, and you smiled anyway, because from now on, smiling is not a choice, it's part of your uniform. Your new residence is breathtaking. That's the first thing they want you to believe. Towering red walls, gold inlaid doors, courtyards lined with perfectly trimmed cypress trees, and pavilions with upturned roofs that catch the sunlight like blades. Everything is symmetrical, calculated, and immaculately preserved, not for comfort, but for control. This is the inner palace, a space of carefully curated beauty and unbearable confinement. The Forbidden City may be a marvel of design, but the inner court, the women's quarters, is a maze of silk, suspicion, and unrelenting quiet. You've just moved into a place that's more beautiful than any prison you could have imagined, and also more inescapable. There are around 300 women here. You don't meet them all at once, of course. They're layered throughout the palace like strata in a mountain, some barely visible, some towering overhead, and most of them quietly watching you from behind lacquered screens and perfectly applied eyeliner. You are one of the lowest ranks, which means you're somewhere near the base of this exquisite social pyramid. You live in the outer chambers, in a small shared suite with 3 other girls who look just as overwhelmed as you. Your belonging, which consists of precisely 1 trunk of standard issue robes and a hairpin made from cheaper jade, are arranged for you. You are instructed not to move them. Everything has a place. You have a place, whether you like it or not. The first thing you notice is the silence. It's not peaceful. It's not meditative. It's tactical. Every hallway, every garden, every shared dining space is lined with unspoken rules about who may speak, how loudly, and with what facial expression. You learn quickly that raised voices are not just frowned upon, they are recorded. Eunuchs pass through regularly, not in a rush, but with the kind of purpose that suggests every casual stroll is a surveillance mission. Their eyes miss nothing, and they're not the only ones watching. Your fellow concubines observe everything: how you walk, who you stand next to, how you react to praise or correction. A misplaced smile can ruin you. An overheard sigh can earn you a demotion. You don't even sigh anymore. You've stopped blinking unless absolutely necessary. There are no mirrors in your room. That's not an accident. Mirrors are reserved for higher-ranking concubines, the ones who are trusted not to get too attached to what they see. Instead, you're allowed a polished brass plate that warps your reflection just enough to make you doubt whether you're truly as composed as you think you are. Your appearance is no longer for you anyway. It's a performance for the court, for the emperor, for the Dowager Empress if she happens to pass through. You are not a woman. You are a representative of the emperor's taste, a piece of decorative statecraft, a very quiet symbol of imperial stability. Or instability, if you mess up. The rules are overwhelming, not because they're complicated, quite the opposite. They are rigid, memorized, and absolute. There is a correct way to walk. Your feet must never fully leave the ground. They should glide, not lift. There is a correct way to stand. Hands folded at the waist, eyes slightly downcast, back straight, but not aggressively so. There is a correct way to enter a room, exit a room, pour tea, bow, speak, breathe. And if you think you can simply memorize these rituals and move on with your life, think again. The rules shift slightly depending on who's in the room. The presence of a senior consort changes everything. The Dowager Empress changes more. And the Emperor? He rewrites reality with a glance. Most days, you don't see him. He is the sun, and you're one of 1,000 small flowers, hoping to be warmed by a single passing ray of attention. You're aware of his existence the way a villager is aware of the distant court, theoretically. You might catch a glimpse at a ceremonial function if you're lucky enough to be selected as decorative background material. You're expected to be honoured just to exist in his gravitational field, whether or not he acknowledges you. The few women who are called into his chambers are escorted like rare artefacts, veiled, powdered, and handled by attendants with the care usually reserved for priceless porcelain. You, however, are not priceless, not yet. Your days are structured like a bureaucrat's fever dream. You wake before dawn, you dress in silence, you attend posture instruction, then etiquette instruction, then embroidery practice, which is less about making anything useful and more about cultivating an air of quiet, feminine patience. You learn poetry, not to write it, but to quote it at the right moment during court gatherings. You study music, not to perform, but to sit attractively next to someone who does. Your entire education is designed to make you presentable, manageable, and strategically appealing. You are being trained to exist beautifully and invisibly at the same time. Meals are communal, but not social. You eat in long, narrow halls where speaking is discouraged, and glancing around too much is interpreted as nosiness. Each girl is allotted a designated spot at the table based on her current favourability score. Not officially, of course, but everyone knows how it works. The better you're standing, the closer you sit to the head of the room. The lower your status, the more time you spend staring at the wall. The food is rich, but you've stopped enjoying it. Eating is just another performance. Don't eat too quickly, don't eat too little, don't look like you enjoy it more than the woman next to you. Someone is always watching. There are no friendships here. At best, you form temporary alliances based on mutual survival. At worst, you smile at someone during breakfast, only to discover later that they reported you for stepping out of line during a tea ceremony. The worst part is, they weren't lying. You did step out of line. You were one toe too far left. You were one blink too slow. And that's all it takes. At night, you lie in bed and think about how much time has passed. You're not sure anymore. A week, a month. Time moves differently here. The seasons change, but you never feel the wind. You never hear the rain. Your world is walled off from everything except protocol. You exist behind carved screens and silk curtains, surrounded by whispers, and walking on eggshells made of lacquered etiquette. Sometimes you dream of running, but there's nowhere to go. You're now part of what they call the House of Internal Affairs. It sounds important, but really it just means you're part of the staff the Emperor occasionally sleeps with, or might or won't. The name gives the illusion of dignity to something far more transactional. You are one of many, interchangeable, ranked, reviewed, rarely remembered, but still expected to be radiant, calm, and delighted to be here. And yet, you keep smiling. Because not smiling is suspicious, because crying is punishable, because there's no mirror to remind you what you look like anymore. Just the echo of your own silence, bouncing between red walls, polished floors, and the 1,000 unspoken expectations of a palace that never truly sleeps. Congratulations, you've made it. You're now an official concubine of the Qing Imperial Court, which is a little like being promoted from pawn to slightly fancier pawn. You're no longer in training, no longer a hopeful name on a chart, no longer sleeping 4 to a room in the outer quarters. Now you sleep 2 to a room, and your mattress is slightly less lumpy. You've been given a new robe in a slightly richer shade of beige and a hair ornament made of real, albeit badly scratched, jade. Most importantly, you have a number. Not a name, not a title, a rank recorded in ink, stored in a ledger maintained by someone who probably resents you for existing. The Imperial ranking system for concubines is both dazzlingly complex and depressingly efficient. At the very top, you have the Empress, one woman to rule them all. Below her are the consorts, the Imperial noble consort, the noble consorts, the pure consorts, and the half-dozen variations in between. These women wear robes dyed in hues you're not even allowed to look at directly, and their headdresses defy both gravity and reason. Then come the concubines, women like you, technically part of the hierarchy, but treated more like ornamental background music. And below you are the palace maids, who clean, serve, and know everything you say when you think no one's listening. So yes, you outrank someone, but don't let it go to your head. Each rank comes with its own colour palette, living quarters, schedule, and etiquette manual. You've received yours, a tidy stack of bamboo slips outlining exactly when you may leave your quarters, how far you may walk, and which direction to bow in when passing a superior. Your meals are no longer communal but delivered by a maid whose politeness is directly proportional to how well liked you currently are. The better your standing, the warmer the soup. You've had lukewarm soup for 3 days now, which means someone important either forgot you exist or is subtly reminding you that you're replaceable. The higher-ranking consorts don't speak to you, and you wouldn't dare speak to them unless invited. You see them occasionally, gliding through the courtyards in procession, surrounded by attendants and tiny judgmental cats that seem to know exactly who has power and who doesn't. Their gowns are stitched with golden thread and symbols of mythical authority. Yours has chrysanthemums and fraying cuffs. Their tea is served in porcelain so fine it could probably file your taxes. Yours comes in a cup that has, at least once, been repaired with lacquer and regret. Your job officially is to be available. Available for what depends on the emperor's mood, the calendar, and a court system that views female attention as a limited commodity to be rationed and rotated. When your name comes up, and it might eventually, you'll be summoned for grooming, dressed by attendants and presented for inspection like a ceremonial plate. If you're chosen, you may spend an evening in the emperor's chambers. If not, you return to your quarters and practice looking grateful. This process is called favour, and it determines everything, from what food you eat to whether you're addressed as respected lady or simply you there. Falling out of favour is easy, rising is not. Favour can be lost for any number of reasons. Poor posture, poor timing, an unflattering comment from a jealous rival, or simply existing on a day when someone else was more interesting. Gain favour, and your room is moved closer to the emperor's residence. Lose it, and you're quietly relocated to the far wing of the palace, where the hallways are drafty and the staff forgets your meal preferences. You've already memorised which direction the hot tea comes from. It has yet to come for you. There are punishments, of course. You don't get demoted with a letter. You're reassigned, reprimanded, or simply removed from rotation. If you speak out of turn or offend someone above your station, which includes nearly everyone, you may find yourself assigned to laundry detail. Laundry duty in the palace is less about folding linens and more about scrubbing the outer garments of people who very much want to forget you ever existed. You'll be reminded of your place with every wet sleeve and every whisper passed between senior maids. Beatings are rarer, but not unheard of. Physical punishment isn't given lightly. It leaves marks after all, but humiliation is its own kind of violence. You've seen it. A concubine demoted publicly, stripped of her ornaments, made to stand in the cold until she fainted. The lesson is clear. Your dignity is conditional. Your rank is temporary, and the palace has a long memory for insolence and a very short one for your better days. And yet, despite all this, you start to learn how to navigate. You study the patterns. You learn which concubines are favoured and which ones are falling out. You memorise the preferences of mid-ranking eunuchs who control access to the emperor's schedule. You begin offering carefully phrased compliments that sound sincere but are vague enough not to be weaponized. You don't trust anyone, but you smile at everyone. You perfect the art of being pleasant and forgettable, which for someone at your level is safer than being memorable. You're allowed a few personal items now: a fan with painted plum blossoms, a hair ribbon from home, a small scroll of poetry you can recite when the room is too quiet, and you need to remind yourself that language still exists. You arrange these things carefully, not because they bring you joy, but because they're yours. Everything else, your robes, your quarters, your role, belongs to the palace. You've begun to understand that being a concubine is not about love or even attraction. It's about visibility. The emperor can elevate you with a single glance, but most of the time, he doesn't look at all. You are part of the machinery, a living ornament, somewhere between furniture and flora. You're not the empress, not a maid, not even a reliable confidant. You're a symbol, a number, a controlled variable in the imperial experiment that is this court. But for now, you still have your rank. Low as it is, it's something. And in a place where people vanish for being inconvenient, sometimes surviving unnoticed is its own form of victory. You wake up before the sun, not because anyone expects anything productive from you, but because being awake early is considered virtuous. You dress in silence, assisted by a maid who barely looks at you unless you commit a mistake. She ties your sash a little too tightly today. Maybe she's annoyed. Maybe she's just bored. You don't ask. Asking would imply that you deserve an answer. You sit down for your morning grooming, hair combed, face powdered, posture adjusted like a porcelain doll being positioned on a shelf. It's not for anyone in particular. It's just what's expected. Every day begins like this, not with purpose, but with preparation for the possibility of purpose. You eat breakfast at a lacquered table with 3 other concubines, whose names you remember only because they've been assigned the same walking schedule. No one speaks unless someone very important walks by, in which case you all laugh softly and politely, as if the past 15 minutes of dead silence were simply an oversight. The food is delicate and artfully arranged: congee, pickled radish, steamed bun, but none of it tastes like much anymore. You eat slowly, eyes down, hands folded when not in use. You have learned that enthusiasm is suspicious, appetite even more so. Then comes the waiting, always the waiting. Officially, it's called leisure time, but there's nothing leisurely about it. You sit in the courtyard or in one of the interior parlours, depending on the weather. You embroider flowers you will never wear, write poetry you can't share, and sip tea that's been reheated just enough to count as warm. You do this while looking calm, content, and slightly ethereal, because someone may walk by, and if they do, you need to look like someone worth remembering, but not too memorable, just enough to seem pleasant, just enough to seem safe. There are activities, if you can call them that. You attend tea ceremonies where you sit on the edge of silk cushions and pretend to care deeply about the exact angle at which the teapot is held. You participate in music sessions where instruments are tuned more often than played. You join embroidery classes where the senior concubines gently correct your stitching while evaluating the tone of your posture. None of these are optional. None of them are enjoyable. They're theatre. Elaborate, slow-moving theatre meant to display your elegance, your refinement, your utter lack of personal ambition. You're allowed to walk twice a day, provided you follow the designated paths and do not stray from the route. You walk in pairs or small groups, always in silence unless addressed. The garden paths are beautifully maintained, with rock arrangements, bonsai trees, and ponds so pristine they might be lacquered. It should be peaceful, but you know better than to mistake stillness for serenity. Everything here is staged, every tree trimmed, every koi pond a reflection of hierarchy. Even the squirrels seem to understand protocol. The rest of the day is spent either sitting or pretending not to eavesdrop. Conversations in the palace are currency, and everyone is bankrupt until proven otherwise. You overhear fragments. Someone was moved to better quarters. Someone else has been reassigned to food preparation. Another has developed a mysterious cough that may or may not be politically convenient. You don't ask questions. You file it all away. If something's important, it will come back around. If not, it's still useful to know what happened when someone vanishes. You're summoned occasionally, though never for anything exciting. A eunuch might appear to inform you that your presence is required at a cultural recital, where you will sit on a stool for 2 hours, watching a minor court musician play the guqin, while someone translates the lyrics of a tragic poem you're not allowed to react to emotionally. Or you may be asked to assist a higher-ranking concubine with her attire, which is less a request and more a reminder that she outranks you, and you are here to reflect her importance. You smile and hold the mirror. She doesn't thank you. You don't expect her to. The emperor, of course, does not appear. He is busy with the affairs of state, or so you're told. On rare occasions, you hear his footsteps in the central corridor, always accompanied by a small procession of eunuchs and guards. You bow as he passes, holding the pose until your knees ache. He doesn't look at you. You don't expect him to. Still, you wonder what would happen if he did. You imagine him noticing you, not in a sweeping romantic gesture, but in a brief flicker of interest. Just enough to change your rotation. Just enough to make the hours of posture and powder lead somewhere. Evenings are the most unbearable part of the day. There's a long stretch between dinner and lights out, where you're supposed to engage in refined personal development. That means more embroidery, more poetry, more sitting in heavily scented rooms, pretending not to feel the stale perfume cling to your skin. Sometimes, a senior concubine will perform a recitation or demonstration, a calligraphy piece, a story, a lesson in flower arranging. You sit through these performances like a student in a never-ending finishing school, applauding with appropriate politeness, careful not to clap louder than the others. You go to bed when you're told, not a moment sooner. You lie still back straight, eyes open to the dark ceiling above. There is no moonlight here. The windows are shuttered. The walls are thick. The silence is total. The only sound is the occasional shuffle of a eunuch's slippers or the quiet cough of another girl down the hall. You think about tomorrow. It will be identical to today. The same waking, walking, waiting. The same meals, the same posture drills, the same emotional neutral zone you must maintain to survive. You begin to understand that you're not a woman in the traditional sense anymore. You are part of a ceremonial function, a moving, breathing, beautifully dressed afterthought. The palace runs on structure, and you are one of the replaceable cogs. You're not expected to create anything. You're expected to exist gracefully, endlessly, and without complaint. Time here is measured not in days but in promotions, guaritiare, which never come, and punishments, which always do. Still, you hold yourself carefully. You speak only when prompted. You smile just enough. Because in this place, that's what daily life is. A performance of perfection, played for an audience that rarely bothers to look. There is a schedule. Of course there is. In a palace where your daily walk is timed and your tea temperature practically legislated, it makes perfect sense that the emperor's sex life would run on something resembling a bureaucratic train timetable. At the beginning of every lunar month, the Grand Eunuch of Internal Affairs prepares a list, a neat, orderly chart with the names of concubines selected for night duty. The rotation is determined by rank, recent favour, political alliances, and the occasional whim disguised as a strategic decision. You're not informed directly. Instead, your maid begins brushing your hair a little more carefully, and the soup improves. That's how you know. The day your name appears on the list, the air around you changes. People who ignored you last week now look at you with thin smiles. A few fellow concubines grow suspiciously complimentary. One even gives you a piece of candied plum from her private stash, which is less an act of kindness and more a subtle way of asking to be remembered if things go well for you. The higher-ranking women don't acknowledge you at all. which is somehow worse. It means you're not seen as a threat. It means they're certain your night will be uneventful or short-lived or both. You're summoned to the bathing hall at dusk, not to bathe yourself, of course. That task belongs to the attendants, who scrub you with a precision that suggests they're trying to polish you into something less human. You're washed in water scented with orchid petals and rinsed until your skin feels fragile, like stretched rice paper. Your hair is oiled and styled in a complicated updo you're not expected to maintain. Your nails are painted, your cheeks dusted, your lips tinted with crushed flour paste. The goal is to make you look ethereal, otherworldly, and, above all, pleasing in soft candlelight. Not too bold, not too dull, just enough to suggest warmth without any actual personality. The robes they give you are not the kind you wear during the day. These are thinner, sheerer, more ornamental than functional. Silk that slides when you move, embroidery that catches the candlelight just enough to suggest luxury. You're not expected to speak unless spoken to. You're not expected to initiate anything. You are, in essence, a ceremonial object, an offering, not of love, not even of companionship, just of availability. You're wheeled across the palace grounds in a curtained palanquin, flanked by 2 eunuchs who have seen this ritual hundreds of times and maintain the detached demeanour of people transporting expensive furniture. When you arrive at the Emperor's quarters, you are announced but not welcomed. The inner chamber is quiet, the screens are closed. You wait on a stool while the eunuchs finish their arrangements. Then they bow, step out, and leave you in silence. Sometimes the Emperor appears immediately. Sometimes you wait an hour. Sometimes you wait longer, and he never comes at all. There are evenings when he's delayed by court matters, or distracted by someone else higher on the list. On those nights, you return to your room without comment, your effort evaporating into the silence like the orchid water you were scrubbed in. If he does arrive, the tone is not romantic. This isn't a secret rendezvous or a scene from a novel. It's more like a diplomatic meeting in soft lighting. He may speak, he may not. He might ask about your province, your calligraphy practice, or whether you've heard the latest gossip about the Grand Council. He might want music, he might want silence. You respond with the balance of polite attentiveness and complete emotional neutrality. Too warm, and you're presumptuous. Too cold, and you're ungrateful. Your entire future could rest on how convincingly you react to a passing comment about tea preference. Then comes the part you've been prepared for, but not really prepared for. It is efficient, unemotional, sometimes clinical. You've been taught that intimacy is a sacred duty, a chance to bear an heir, to elevate your standing, to serve the Emperor in the most intimate sense. But in reality, it feels more like clocking in for a shift you didn't ask for. There is no affection. There are no whispered promises. You lie still. You smile faintly. You try not to breathe too loudly. When it's over, you wait for the signal to leave. Sometimes he falls asleep before you do. Sometimes he leaves you staring at the ceiling while he talks about irrigation reforms. You are not here to be loved. You are here to be tolerated in elegant silence. If you're lucky, and that's a big if, you might conceive. Pregnancy is its own battlefield, one with different rules and far more dangerous consequences. But for now, you're just trying to make it through the night without doing anything that could be interpreted as inappropriate, like speaking too much, or too little, or existing in the wrong emotional register. You return to your quarters escorted by the same eunuchs, your ornate robes now slightly rumpled, your hair slightly out of place, and your mind somewhere between numb and exhausted. No one says anything the next morning. No one congratulates you. Your schedule resumes as if nothing happened. The other women watch you out of the corners of their eyes, but no one asks questions. They've all done it. They all know. The only evidence that the night occurred is a slight change in your standing. Maybe your meals improve. Maybe you're reassigned to a better embroidery group. Maybe nothing changes at all, and you're left wondering if the whole thing was just a quiet exercise in palace maintenance, like oiling a door hinge no one notices until it creaks. You start to realize that the emperor himself, this figure you've been trained to serve and impress, is more of a concept than a person. He's a moving part of a much larger machine, and your proximity to him doesn't guarantee attention, affection, or even memory. You were there. You did what was required. And now you wait again, just like before, for the next time your name might appear on the list. If it does, you'll go through it all again. The bath, the powder, the robe, the silence. If it doesn't, you'll spend your days as you always do, stitched into the tapestry of the palace, smiling at no one in particular, performing elegance on a schedule that never ends. There are no guarantees in the harem, but pregnancy is about as close as you'll ever get to real power. It doesn't matter how low your rank is or how forgettable your face might be. The moment your womb contains a potential heir, you're not just another concubine. You're a political asset, a walking possibility. And in a court that runs on lineage and legacy, possibility is everything. Of course, with great potential comes even greater risk. Getting pregnant might be the best thing that ever happens to you, or it might be the thing that gets you quietly removed from the roster entirely. At first, the signs are subtle. You're late, you feel strange, a little nauseous, a little more tired than usual. You mention it quietly to your maid, who stiffens and nods without a word. Within hours, the physician arrives, a stooped man with a long beard and the bedside manner of a tax auditor. He takes your pulse, asks a few vague questions, and leaves. You're not told anything directly, but the next morning your porridge is accompanied by ginseng and a side of speculative glances from the kitchen staff. Congratulations, you're now under observation. Once your pregnancy is confirmed, the transformation is immediate. You are moved to new quarters, usually closer to the centre of the palace. Your schedule changes, no more embroidery, no more tea ceremonies. You're no longer expected to be decorative. You're now expected to be careful. You're given new robes in paler, looser fabrics. You're walked everywhere. Someone else carries your tea. You're assigned 2 maids instead of 1 to serve you and 1 to watch the other. You don't trust either of them. You shouldn't. Other concubines offer their congratulations with fixed smiles and slightly narrowed eyes. They speak kindly. They send gifts, delicate silk shoes, packets of dried fruit, prayer scrolls for healthy sons. You accept them all and eat none of it. Every item is a question. Every sweet thing may be laced with herbs. Every token may carry more than sentiment. You've seen what happens when pregnancies go wrong. Sometimes the mother bleeds unexpectedly. Sometimes she faints at the wrong moment. Sometimes she simply disappears. Her condition downgraded from expectant to not discussed. There's always a reason given. It's never the real one. If you're aligned with the right faction, meaning your patrons are powerful and your rivals fewer, the palace begins to take a polite interest in your health. You receive better food, better bedding, better gossip. Your name is mentioned in passing by people who used to forget it. The senior concubines take note of you. Some will treat you with cautious respect. Others will try to sabotage you quietly, either through words whispered to eunuchs or accidental invitations to stressful social events. You're expected to attend with grace and stamina. If, on the other hand, you're not aligned with the right people, if you were chosen on a whim or gained favour without political backing, your pregnancy is a liability. You've just become a wild card, and nobody likes unpredictability in a system built entirely around control. In that case, your days are filled with subtler dangers. A cold draft where none should be. A step that feels slightly too slick. A bowl of soup that tastes a little off. You become paranoid, but not without reason. You're playing chess, blindfolded, with your body as the board. Every move is high stakes. Every misstep permanent. and through all of it, you're expected to be serene. You must walk with dignity, speak softly, and smile with a kind of maternal glow that implies gratitude without arrogance. You must not boast, you must not tremble, you must never ever complain. Because if something goes wrong, if the child is lost, if your health declines, if anything happens that causes discomfort to the larger imperial narrative, it will be your fault. You will be blamed for stress, for moving too quickly, for angering the gods with your bad attitude. Even if someone poisons you, it will be phrased as a failure of discipline. The court is many things, but forgiving is not one of them. Should the pregnancy go to term, and many do not, you'll be given a chamber in the maternity wing, staffed by midwives who report directly to the Empress, or, depending on your political positioning, to someone less benevolent. The birth will be attended by doctors, witnesses, and at least one high-ranking official who has nothing better to do than ensure protocol is followed. You will scream into a pillow if you must, but you will not curse, weep, or act uncivilized. Dignity, even in agony, is required. If the child is a girl, you may receive a congratulatory scroll and a slight bump in your rations. The baby will be taken to be raised in the women's quarters by wet nurses and nannies. You may see her, occasionally, from a distance. If the child is a boy, everything changes. Boys are potential heirs. Boys carry power. Boys must be protected from enemies, from illness, and occasionally from their own mothers. Your son may be taken away within days. You'll be informed he's healthy, you'll be thanked for your service, and you'll be expected to resume your duties as if you hadn't just lost a piece of your soul to the machinery of succession. There are stories whispered in the laundry halls, muttered during long walks, about concubines who bore sons and then vanished, about babies who died mysteriously, mothers who were punished for the death of a child they barely had the chance to hold, about women who bore daughters and were never summoned again. The palace remembers what it wants to. Records are easy to edit. People, even easier. And yet, despite all this, pregnancy is still your best chance at survival, maybe even advancement. If you navigate the minefield correctly, if you deliver a healthy child, if you attach yourself to the right patrons, you might rise. You might receive a new title, a better room, a little more power, enough to protect yourself, maybe even to feel safe for a time. But you never really forget what it cost you. You carry the weight of that child, whether they're in your arms or a name whispered from afar. You carry the fear, the calculation, the constant vigilance. You carry the knowledge that your body's not yours. It's a chess piece, a risk, a symbol. And while the palace might drape you in silk and call it a reward, you know what it really is. It's a weapon, and you're holding it to your own throat. On the surface, the harem is a place of order. Soft voices, gliding footsteps, silk robes in soothing pastels, the kind of environment that might be mistaken for peaceful if you didn't know better. But you do, because underneath the lace and lacquer is a battlefield, not of swords and bloodshed, but of words, gestures, and glances sharp enough to slit a throat without ever breaking the skin. Here, war is waged with perfume bottles, invitations, and the strategic sharing of gossip. The favoured concubines smile sweetly, but make no mistake. They are generals in a war you're barely allowed to spectate, let alone survive. Everything is political. Every conversation, every pause, every decision about where to sit or who to nod at in the garden is part of a long, slow-moving campaign. Alliances shift daily, sometimes hourly. You are encouraged to be graceful, obedient, and charming, but only in ways that don't overshadow someone more powerful than you, which unfortunately includes just about everyone. You're not here to shine. You're here to reflect the glow of those who already do. Just enough to look valuable, not enough to look threatening. There are cliques, of course. No one calls them that, but they exist. The senior consorts have their own informal courts, complete with sycophants, spies, and carefully maintain circles of influence. If you're invited to serve tea in one of their pavilions, it's an opportunity. It's also a test. Your posture will be analysed, your conversation dissected, one wrong word, one overly ambitious smile, and you may find yourself reassigned to a wing where the water never runs hot and the lanterns flicker all night. The courtesies are elaborate, the stakes higher than they appear. Then there's the matter of gifts. Gifts are currency, not just from the emperor, those are obvious, but from everyone else. A simple comb, a carved jade pendant, a bolt of silk dyed in the right colour. All of these are strategic tools. You give gifts to show loyalty, to hint at a favour, to distract, to implicate. You receive them with the same caution you'd use to handle an open flame. Every gesture is layered, every object a message. Sometimes the message is friendship. Sometimes it's a warning. Occasionally, it's both. And of course, there's poison. No one talks about it openly, but everyone knows it's there. Subtle, elegant, and nearly impossible to trace. It comes in the form of tainted tea, spoiled fruit, cosmetic powders laced with herbs that burn slowly through the blood. When someone falls ill unexpectedly, no one says anything, but everyone watches, closely. If she recovers, it's treated like a minor miracle. If she doesn't, it's explained as unfortunate. You don't ask questions. You sip carefully. You never eat anything, unless it's tasted first. Not that this stops anything, but it makes people think twice. The eunuchs are not just bystanders in this battlefield. They are key players. They control information, access, and supplies. They know who is favoured, who is rising, who is due to fall. They whisper between chambers, carry messages that aren't written, and keep score better than anyone else. Befriend the right eunuch, and your life gets noticeably easier. Warmer baths, better news, perhaps even an early warning when something is about to go terribly wrong. Offend the wrong one, and you may find your shoes missing, your maid replaced, or your name mysteriously absent from the next ceremonial invitation list. You try to stay neutral, but neutrality is hard when you're a pawn in a game where everyone else is playing chess with poisoned queens. You keep your head down. You keep your voice soft. You remember everyone's birthday and none of your own opinions. You survive by being just interesting enough to be kept, but never intriguing enough to be watched too closely. You do your embroidery. You attend your calligraphy sessions. You express admiration for other women's robes while memorizing the patterns of their social attacks. Then there are the promotions. When one of the favored concubines is elevated from consort to noble consort, or granted a new residence, the entire palace reacts. Some celebrate, some sulk, some begin plotting immediately. Because every promotion is also a shift in power, and power here is zero-sum. If someone rises, someone else must fall. The emperor may make the decision, but the ripples it creates flood through the harem in seconds. You've seen the aftermath. Weeping maids, mysteriously absent attendants, a concubine quietly relocated to the far wing, never mentioned again. Occasionally there are executions, not often. The court prefers more elegant forms of erasure. But when someone has gone too far, an uncovered poisoning, a forged letter, an attempted curse, the consequences are swift. The charges are always vague: disruption of harmony, improper conduct, violation of sacred order. You hear the stories afterward. A woman dragged from her quarters at dawn, a scream that echoed through the south corridor, the silence that followed. No one ever says her name again. The room is cleaned, the scrolls updated, the palace moves on. You don't plan to be one of those women. You don't plan to be anything, really. Planning is dangerous. You learn to react instead. You learn to watch, to wait, to pivot. You've begun to recognize the signs. A shift in tone, a glance that lasts 1 second too long, a gift delivered at the wrong hour. You keep your quarters immaculate. You keep your words polite. You pretend not to hear things. You smile when you're expected to and disappear the rest of the time. You used to think the harem was a prison. Now you understand that it's a court, not in the romantic sense, but in the legal one, a place where you're always on trial, always being judged, and always at risk of being sentenced. Except here, the sentencing doesn't come with a gavel. It comes with silence, reassignment, or a bowl of tea that smells just a little too sweet. This is the battlefield, and while you may never win, you can at least avoid being the first to fall. They say the emperor rules the empire, the empress rules the court, and the eunuchs run everything else. That's not an exaggeration. In the Forbidden City, eunuchs are the oil in the machine, the eyes in the walls, and the mouths that repeat everything they shouldn't but somehow always do. They know what time you woke up this morning, how many dumplings you ate, and who stopped by your quarters under the pretense of borrowing a poetry scroll. They see everything. Forget nothing, and remember to remind you of both whenever it benefits them. A eunuch escorted you into the palace on your first day. A eunuch wrote your name into the registry, checked your teeth, and assigned you your first robe. And since then, every single moment of your daily life has been organised, observed, or outright orchestrated by men who no longer pose a sexual threat to the emperor's collection of concubines, and who have, in exchange, been granted sweeping influence. Their status is precarious, their power absolute. You fear them. Everyone does. They are not all the same, of course. The palace eunuchs are a hierarchy within a hierarchy, and their ranks are just as elaborate as yours. Some serve as chamber attendants, others manage food, others maintain the bathhouses or coordinate court ceremonies. But the real power belongs to the senior eunuchs, the ones in charge of the emperor's schedule, the ones who control the rotation of concubines, who know which girl is rising and which one is just days away from a conveniently timed illness. These men don't just carry information, they curate it. And if you're not careful, you could find yourself edited right out of the narrative. If you're smart, you learn early on which eunuchs matter and which ones merely deliver fruit. The ones who walk slowly through the gardens at odd hours, who glance at the concubines as they pass but never speak. Those are the ones worth watching. Their silence is louder than most conversations. Their loyalty lies not with you or anyone like you. It lies with whoever holds power. If that changes, so do their allegiances. They can pivot faster than a concubine caught smiling at the wrong banquet guest. You may be tempted to befriend one. That's understandable. You're surrounded by rivals and half-friends who would sell your secrets for the promise of warmer soup. The eunuchs, by contrast, seem practical, even kindly at times. One might slip you an extra steamed bun. Another might, accidentally, mention that your name has been coming up more often in the inner chamber discussions. You may think this is a sign of trust. It's not. It's a test. Everything they do is a test. They want to know how much you'll offer in return. Gossip, gratitude, favours, secrets. The exchange rate changes daily. Still, alliances with eunuchs are sometimes necessary. You want someone to whisper your name in the right ear, to recommend you for the next festival procession, to casually mention that your embroidery has improved. These small nudges can shift your entire trajectory. And if you're lucky, or very careful, you can secure the favour of a senior eunuch who will look out for you when the political tides shift. But the danger lies in forgetting who they really work for. They're not your friends, they're middlemen in a system that has no interest in your survival beyond its usefulness. And then there's the gossip. Oh, the gossip. Eunuchs are the grand archivists of palace scandal. They know everything. Who's been visiting whom? Who's fallen out of favour? Who was overheard weeping behind the garden wall? They swap stories like merchants trade silk, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes painfully accurate. If you want to know what's really happening in the harem, don't ask another concubine. Watch which eunuch is smiling too much and which one stops making eye contact. Of course, the gossip comes with a price. If you're caught listening too closely, asking too many questions, or reacting too visibly to a juicy bit of news, it will be noted. You'll be marked as someone who knows too much. And in this place, that's never a compliment. Information is dangerous. It gives you a temporary sense of control, right before it's used against you. The punishments, when they come, often start with eunuchs. They arrive unannounced, holding scrolls or orders you don't get to read. They escort you away from your quarters for questioning. They confiscate your belongings, claiming an inventory check. They relay accusations in tones so calm, they sound more like reminders than charges. And they never, ever raise their voices. That's the worst part. Their control is terrifying, because if a eunuch is angry, you won't know it until you're already kneeling in a cold room, being informed that your services are no longer required. You've seen it happen. A concubine says the wrong thing to the wrong eunuch, and the next day she's missing from morning roll call. Her quarters are swept clean. Her name is never mentioned again. Some say she was reassigned to a temple. Others say she was sent home. Still others whisper that she was found guilty of sowing discord, a catch-all phrase that means someone powerful wanted her gone, and a eunuch made it happen. But despite all this, you still rely on them. Because you have to. They deliver your food, arrange your appearances, announce your name at court functions. They determine which physician you see, which gifts make it to your hands, and which do not. Without them, you are invisible. With them, you are at risk. There is no safe distance, just calculated proximity. And so you learn to navigate. You speak with respect. You offer subtle compliments. You remember which eunuchs like lotus seed cakes and which prefer sandalwood incense. You don't lie to them, at least not obviously. And you don't tell them the full truth unless you've already rehearsed what they'll do with it. You listen more than you speak. You observe. And you never forget that the man holding your bath towel this morning may be the same man who decides where you'll be sleeping next week. In the end, eunuchs are the quiet architects of your survival. They don't rule, they don't reign, but they guide the flow of power like wind through silk, unseen but undeniable. And while they may not carry swords, they know exactly where to cut. You've heard stories, of course. Everyone has. The emperor may hold the mandate of heaven, but within the walls of the inner court, it's his mother who decides which way the celestial wind is blowing. The Dowager Empress is not just the mother of the emperor. She's the mother of every rule you've been forced to memorize. Her authority here is absolute, unchecked, and as changeable as the weather. Except the weather rarely demands silence with a single raised eyebrow. She lives in a suite so opulent, it's practically its own kingdom, draped in curtains embroidered with dragons and stitched with silk, so fine it could probably pass through a needle on its own. No one visits her uninvited. No one leaves her presence unchanged. If the harem is a battlefield, then the Dowager Empress is the general, who doesn't need to shout. Her mood determines the tone of the day. If she is pleased, the corridors seem brighter, the eunuchs move faster, and the senior consorts smile just a little more often. If she is displeased, the entire palace holds its breath. No one speaks above a whisper. No one suggests anything. Even the birds in the garden seem to chirp less. It's not fear exactly, though there's plenty of that, but reverence laced with the constant awareness that a woman who rose to the top of this hierarchy didn't do so by being merciful. You may never speak to her directly. Most concubines don't, but that doesn't mean you're off her radar. The Dowager Empress has a network of informants more sophisticated than anything the military could dream of. Maids, eunuchs, consorts, and even visiting nobles all report to her, directly or indirectly. She knows which girl cried during her third etiquette lesson. She knows who's been hoarding candied ginger, who's been slipping out of her quarters at odd hours, and who's been asking too many questions about promotion protocols. She may not act on all of it, but she doesn't forget anything. She files it away until it's useful. Her opinions are less like statements and more like sentences handed down from a court that doesn't bother with appeals. If she declares that a certain concubine is troublesome, that girl will find herself demoted within days. If she remarks offhandedly that someone has a pleasant singing voice, that person's rotation suddenly improves. It's not just her words either. It's her expressions, her silences, the way she sips her tea. When the Dowager Empress narrows her eyes, careers end. When she smiles, it's either a blessing or a trap, sometimes both. The most unsettling part is how little you can do to influence her favour. With the Emperor, at least there's a performance. You know the dance: be pleasing, be poised, be just mysterious enough to seem worth his time. But with the Dowager Empress, it's impossible to predict what will work. She might value obedience today and boldness tomorrow. She might admire humility in one girl and call it weakness in another. You can try to impress her by being quiet, efficient, respectful. But then again, she might find that forgettable. And nothing is more dangerous in her eyes than someone who wastes space. You've only seen her once, briefly, at a seasonal festival. She arrived flanked by attendants, wearing robes so heavily embroidered they looked more like tapestries than clothing. She moved slowly, but there was no mistaking the force of her presence. Everyone bowed the moment she appeared. Not the polite, ceremonial kind of bow you give the Emperor. This was the deep, spine-stretching version that says, "Please, for the love of all that is sacred, don't let me offend you." You didn't even look at her directly. No one did. You stared at the floor, heart pounding, and hoped your posture was acceptable. She walked past without a glance, and it was somehow a relief and a disappointment all at once. Your maid once told you, in the kind of whisper that means she regretted it immediately, that the Dowager Empress wasn't always like this, that she had once been a concubine too, younger, clever, and quietly ambitious. She rose through the ranks not by seduction or charm, but by being the last woman standing in a harem full of rivals who underestimated her. When the old Empress fell out of favour, she stepped into the role like she had been planning it for years. And when her son ascended the throne, she moved into her new chambers with the kind of calm assurance that comes from knowing the war is over and she is the victor. She rarely leaves her quarters now, except for the occasional ceremonial appearance or disciplinary matter. When she does, the entire palace seems to shrink in her presence. Concubines adjust their hair, eunuchs bow lower, conversations stop mid-sentence. She walks slowly, but with absolute purpose. She is old, but never weak. Her hands may tremble, but her decisions do not. And every time you hear her name, it comes with a silence afterward. The kind that says, "Be careful." Sometimes she intervenes directly. A concubine receives a promotion, not because the Emperor asked for her, but because the Dowager Empress recommended it. Another is stripped of her title, escorted out of the palace under vague accusations, her belongings boxed and burned. These decisions are not explained. They are simply carried out. You learn not to ask why. You learn to say thank you for things you didn't request and apologise for things you didn't do. You fantasise occasionally about what it might be like to gain her favour, to be invited into her private chambers, to serve her tea, to earn a nod of approval from the one person who could protect you with a sentence. But those fantasies are short-lived, because you also know what happens when she disapproves, and you've seen what's left behind when she decides a concubine no longer belongs in the story. In this palace, there are many women with power, some through beauty, some through children, some through proximity to the Emperor, but none of them hold a candle to the Dowager Empress. Her power isn't borrowed, it isn't conditional. It doesn't depend on favour or fashion. It just is unshakable, immovable, and terrifyingly silent. You don't pray for her affection. You pray that she never notices you at all. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the cruel part. There's no announcement, no grand declaration, no formal demotion ceremony where someone tells you your time is up. Falling out of favour in the harem is a slow, quiet unravelling. One day you don't get summoned. You think nothing of it. He was probably busy, affairs of state, or perhaps it was just another girl's turn. But then it happens again, and again. Weeks pass. You're still painted, perfumed, and placed in public view during ceremonial functions, but no glances come your way. You are not mentioned. You are not requested. You are not remembered. The first sign is subtle. Your robes. You've had the same rotation of garments for months, but suddenly they're replaced with a new set. Less vibrant, a little stiffer, the embroidery simpler. At first you assume it's just seasonal, but then you notice that the quality of fabric is lower, the stitching looser. You bring it up gently with your maid. She nods, offers no explanation, and changes the subject. That's when you know. The palace is beginning to forget you. Or worse, it's choosing to. Then the food changes, not drastically, not enough to protest, but noticeably. The rice isn't quite as fragrant. The soup is thinner, missing the familiar slivers of ginger or ginseng. Dessert becomes fruit, not the soft, sweet kind reserved for favoured women, but the underripe sort that bruises easily and leaves your mouth dry. You're still being fed, of course. This isn't exile, but it's clear you've been moved to a lower tier, one step above invisible. The portions are enough to sustain you. That's about all they're meant to do. Your schedule begins to shrink. The invitations stop coming. You're no longer asked to participate in music recitals, tea ceremonies, or embroidery displays. When the emperor hosts a private banquet for selected concubines, your name isn't included. You're not explicitly told you've been excluded. No one is that cruel, but the silence is confirmation enough. The other girls notice. They don't say anything, but their glances linger a little longer now. Some seem sympathetic, most seem relieved. It means they're still in the running. Eventually, you're moved. Not far, just a quieter wing of the palace, technically still within the inner court, but it's a different world. The corridors are less polished, the attendants more forgetful. The lanterns don't always get lit on time. Your quarters are still clean, but the air feels stale, like you're living in the space where importance goes to die. You're still a concubine, still ranked, still breathing, but now you're one of them. The women whose names were once whispered with interest and now aren't whispered at all. You spend your days reading poetry you've already memorized and sewing patterns that no one will ever inspect. The maid assigned to you is polite but distant, as if she's already preparing for her next post. The eunuchs who once nodded at you in the halls no longer acknowledge you. You pass like a shadow through the palace. Not unwelcome, but entirely unremarkable. You try to hold your head high. You keep your posture perfect. But it's hard to pretend you're elegant when the room has stopped looking in your direction. Time moves differently now. Hours feel like days. Days blend into each other without markers. You wake up, you dress, you eat, you sit, you sleep. You're still technically part of the rotation, but you haven't been summoned in so long that you've stopped preparing for the possibility. You stopped being nervous weeks ago. You stopped hoping last night. When your name is mentioned at all, it's in the past tense. She was promising. She used to be called often. She had a nice voice. And then there's the moment, the one that seals it, when you catch a glimpse of the emperor, walking through the central garden with a small entourage of favoured consorts. You bow as protocol requires. He passes within feet of you, and he does not look your way, not because he's avoiding you, but because he doesn't recognise you. You are no longer part of the set. You've become scenery, elegant, well-trained, obedient, and completely forgettable. You feel something tighten in your chest, but you show nothing. You bow deeper, and when he disappears around the corner, you straighten and continue walking. as if nothing inside you has shifted at all. The other women rarely visit. There's no advantage to being seen with you anymore. Whatever status you had is gone, and alliances don't come cheap in the harem. You are not useful. You are not threatening. You are not tragic enough to mourn. You're just there. A story half told, a name that never made it into a ballad. You remember when a new concubine once asked you for advice, back when you still had influence. Now they don't ask you anything. They walk past you with that same half smile you used to give the older women when you first arrived. The one that says, "I hope I don't end up like you." And the thing is, no one warns you about this part. They prepare you for competition, for politics, for the rare and dangerous climb up the ladder. They train you in posture, in voice, in etiquette. But no one teaches you how to fade. No one tells you how to keep existing once the spotlight moves on. You're still breathing. You're still here. But without relevance, without purpose, palace life becomes an echo chamber of your former self. A reflection with no mirror. A performance with no audience. You dream more now, sometimes of home, though that place has likely changed beyond recognition. Sometimes of escape, though you know the gates won't open for you. Mostly, you dream of being noticed, not adored, not even wanted, just seen. But when you wake, there is only silence, the rustle of the trees outside, the soft footsteps of another maid delivering another meal you didn't ask for. You eat, you nod, you say thank you with perfect poise, because that's what's left. Poise without purpose, beauty without a gaze, a name still printed on a scroll that no one bothers to read. You've likely wondered by now, what happens if you simply walk out? If you leave your quarters, pass through the red gates, and just keep walking until the city swallows you whole? The answer is simple. You don't. Because escape isn't a possibility here. Not practically, not politically, not even conceptually. The palace was designed to keep people out, yes, but more importantly, it was designed to keep people in, especially women like you, whose presence was never meant to extend beyond these carefully curated walls. You are not a guest here. You are a permanent fixture. Theoretically, you might think there's an end to this life, that once your youth fades, once your usefulness wanes completely, you'll be released. But no, retirement in the palace is not freedom. It is simply a different wing, a dimmer corridor, a quieter type of containment. Retired concubine, those who no longer serve, who no longer bear attention or threat, are moved to the outer quarters, affectionately referred to as the Garden of Forgotten Blooms. There they live out their days in modest isolation, clothed in simpler robes, their names slowly eroding from court memory like ink left too long in the sun. Some of these women become harmless elders, content to spend their time reciting poetry and rearranging teacups. Others decline into a state best described as dignified madness. They speak to no one, repeat the same stories to anyone who will listen, or walk the same garden path every day as if it's still 1741 and they've just been chosen for the emperor's table. No one corrects them, no one comforts them. The staff nods politely, refills their tea, and waits for them to fade further. A few take a different path. Becoming a nun is one of the few sanctioned exits from harem life. It's not glamorous, why? You shave your head, wear grey robes, and spend your days in contemplation at a temple far from court. But it is quiet, and sometimes quiet is enough. You've heard rumours of women who begged for this transition, offering their jewellery, their influence, even the names of their rivals in exchange for release. Some were granted the request, others simply disappeared before any vow of poverty could be made. But the ones who try to leave without permission, they don't fare well. Escape attempts are rare, not because no one thinks of it, but because everyone knows the outcome. The last girl who tried it managed to get as far as the outer gardens. She disguised herself in servant's clothing, timed the gates during shift change, and almost made it. Almost. She was caught by a eunuch who recognized her shoes. She was brought back quietly. There was no public scene. Just a scroll issued the next morning stating she had been found guilty of disturbing palace harmony. Her name was struck from the registry by sunset. Execution in the harem is rarely dramatic. No heads on spikes, no public trials. That sort of spectacle is reserved for generals and court officials. For women, it's tea, always tea, brought in a beautiful porcelain cup, set gently beside them by a eunuch with an apologetic smile. You're given the choice to make it graceful. Drink quietly, lie down, and allow the poison to do its work. Or resist and suffer the consequences. Most don't resist. Resistance only delays the inevitable and makes the death harder to bury politely. What's worse is that you're expected to be grateful for the privacy, for the dignity, for the fact that the emperor's reputation will remain intact while your existence is quietly scrubbed from official record. Your family, if they're still around, may receive a condolence letter. Or they may not. It depends on how politically useful your disappearance is at the time. And yet, death isn't always forced. Sometimes it's chosen. You've heard whispers in the laundry halls from older concubines who haven't been summoned in decades. They speak of the slow ache of being forgotten, the way silence can fill your lungs until breathing feels performative. They talk about girls who smiled until they cracked, who sang to themselves until their minds couldn't tell the difference between memory and madness. One of them once said, "They'll never kill me. They just want me to decide when it's time to die." Still, not everyone fades. Some women endure. They become the quiet observers of palace life, the ones who sit near the edges of court ceremonies and watch without speaking. They've survived scandal, illness, demotion, and the death of any hope for a better room. They live like shadows, drifting along the periphery of power. Occasionally, one of them will lock eyes with a new concubine and give the faintest nod. Not a greeting, but a warning. This place does not reward longevity. It merely allows it. You wonder what your end will look like. You try not to, but in the moments between meals and moon phases, your mind drifts there. Will you be one of the quiet ones who fades peacefully into a room no one visits? Will you plead for temple walls and solitude? Will your name vanish from the roster with a single brushstroke? Or will you outlast them all, becoming one of the unmovable fixtures of this palace, no longer desired, but too entrenched to remove? You used to think death was the worst outcome. Now, you understand it's just one of many endings. The worst is not being remembered. The worst is knowing you lived an entire life inside these walls, surrounded by opulence and attention, and still left no trace. The palace doesn't care about your story. It cares about your silence, your obedience, your ability to follow the script, even when no one is watching. Escape was never an option. But endurance, that's a choice you make every day. And for now, you choose to stay, because it's all you have left. Your name, if it's ever written down, will be a single line in a long, unremarkable ledger. Not engraved on a stone or whispered by poets, but copied by a bored scribe onto a dusty scroll that no one will read. Entry: female concubine. Entered the palace in the 35th year of the emperor's reign. No children, no promotions, no formal demotion. Died peacefully. That last part might even be true, in the same way that a candle going out is peaceful, quiet, unseen, irrelevant. There were thousands like you, before you, alongside you, after you. Girls with soft voices and perfect posture. Girls who embroidered swallows onto silk and waited for someone to call their name. Some were clever, some were ruthless, some were just unlucky. A few rose, though fewer than the legends like to suggest. And even they, the rare handful who clawed their way to the highest ranks, were often remembered not for who they were, but for whose child they bore or whose blood they spilled. You won't be one of them, and you've made your peace with that. You no longer rehearse your title in your head, imagining how it might sound if spoken by a eunuch during a festival ceremony. You no longer wonder what it would feel like to be asked to stay the night. You've let those hopes dry out, like pressed flowers in an old book, still pretty, but no longer alive. What remains now is something simpler. You endure, you continue, you make your bed each morning and smooth the silk with practiced hands. You hold your head high, not because anyone is watching, but because it's the only thing left that feels like yours. Occasionally, a historian might stumble across your name, not as a subject, but as a data point, part of a head count, a logistical footnote in the grand ledger of empire. One of 400 concubines recorded during a mid-century census. No details, no distinctions, just a number among numbers. It's not malicious, it's not even personal. It's simply the way history works. It remembers power. It forgets the ones who waited just outside the light. But tonight, as you lie in your narrow bed, eyes open to the ceiling that has watched you for decades, you allow yourself a small moment of memory, not grandeur, not legacy, just memory. You remember the sound of your own laughter, not the delicate, measured kind used in court, but the full, unguarded sound you used to make before you knew what was expected of you. You remember the scent of your mother's cooking, the texture of grass under your feet, the feeling of running without a destination. These things won't be written down, but they were real, they were yours. You think of the other women, the ones who passed through these corridors like drifting lanterns, glowing briefly, then gone. You remember their smiles, their silence, the soft sound of fabric as they moved past you, never quite touching. You remember the ones who left, the ones who cracked, the ones who disappeared without explanation. Their names may not be spoken, but you carry them with you. You remember them. And in a place that so easily forgets, that's no small act. Your legacy will not be a statue or a scroll or a song. It will be the quiet resilience of having survived something designed to consume you. You were part of a machine built to erase you, and yet you remained. You whispered warnings to the new girls. You passed along safe advice in coded glances. You remembered how to be human in a system that rewards silence and punishes anything louder than a sigh. That may not be power, but it is strength, and that strength was real. Perhaps, somewhere far from the capital, a girl not yet born will read about palace life and wonder what it felt like. She'll imagine silk robes and lantern-lit nights, but not the hunger, not the silence, not the years spent waiting for something that never came. She'll picture a world of beauty and ceremony, not realizing that the beauty was a veil and the ceremony a cage. And she will not know your name, but you were real. You lived, you endured, and that matters. The empire will forget you, the records will overlook you, but in this moment, lying still in the dark, listening to the faint rustle of footsteps outside your door, knowing exactly who they belong to and why they don't stop to knock, you understand something deeper than legacy. You understand that your life, though quiet, was part of something vast, a tradition not of glory, but of survival, of women who bore the weight of expectation with straight backs and calm expressions, who navigated impossible choices with nothing but instinct and silence. You are not a legend, you are not a cautionary tale, you are not even an anecdote, but you are here, and if no one else remembers, you do. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a wind stirs the trees in the palace courtyard. Someone giggles, a newer concubine still full of dreams. Somewhere, another girl wakes with hope in her chest, thinking tomorrow might be the day she's called. And in your silence, in your stillness, you offer her the only legacy you have left, understanding. The quiet truth that nothing here lasts, not beauty, not favour, not even fear, just memory, just the echo of women who came before and the ones still to come. And that's the end of tonight's slow spiral through the silken cage of Imperial China's harem. From the brutal selection process to the poisoned promotions, from whispered betrayals to legacy erased by design, life as a concubine was anything but delicate. It was quiet survival wrapped in embroidery. Thanks for drifting through history with me. If you're still awake, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about which part of harem life would have broken you first. The waiting, the rules, or the tea laced with subtle threats. Sleep well.